In 2017, geneticists analyzing the 34,000-year-old remains at Sunghir in Russia expected to find something fairly common in small, isolated ancient populations: inbreeding. Small groups, cut off from outsiders, tend to intermarry out of necessity. Instead, they found almost none. No close relatives had children together. The community appeared to have deliberately sought partners from far outside their immediate circle, generation after generation, with a consistency that looked less like luck and more like rule. Which raises an unsettling question. Nobody at Sunghir had a concept of genetics. No one understood chromosomes, mutations, or recessive disease. So how did people living tens of thousands of years before modern science figure out and consistently act on one of the most important reproductive rules our species has ever followed? The easy assumption is that early humans simply avoided incest out of instinct, some built-in revulsion hardwired from birth. The real answer is stranger and considerably more interesting, because the aversion many people feel toward the idea of a sibling as a romantic partner doesn't appear to be encoded by genetics recognizing relatives directly at all. It's built on something far more indirect and far more fragile than most people realize. This brings us to one of the most famous findings in evolutionary psychology, something researchers call the Westermarck effect, named after the Finnish sociologist who first proposed it in the late 1800s. His theory suggested that children raised in close physical proximity during early childhood, regardless of actual blood relation, develop a strong, automatic sexual aversion to one another later in life. Not because their bodies detect shared DNA, because prolonged, early life closeness itself gets interpreted by the brain as a signal of kinship. For decades, this remained largely theoretical, until researchers found a striking natural experiment already playing out in the real world. Studies conducted on Israeli kibbutzim, communal settlements where unrelated children were often raised together from infancy in shared living arrangements, found something remarkable. Marriages between children raised in the same peer group from a young age were exceptionally rare, and when they did occur, they were almost never romantically initiated from within that childhood group. The children weren't related at all. Their bodies simply treated early closeness as if they were. A separate, equally compelling case emerged from Taiwan, where anthropologist Arthur Wolf studied a historical practice called minor marriage, in which a young girl was adopted into a family, specifically to eventually marry one of the sons. The two children raised together from early childhood as something close to siblings. Wolf's research, spanning thousands of these arranged unions, found consistently higher divorce rates, lower fertility, and documented reluctance toward consummation compared to marriages between adults who hadn't grown up together. The genetic relationship in these cases was completely absent. Yet the psychological pattern showed up anyway, almost identical to what actual siblings experience, which suggests something profound. The mechanism protecting early humans from the genetic dangers of inbreeding wasn't built to detect blood at all. It was built to detect closeness, using early life proximity as an approximate, imperfect, but remarkably effective stand-in for kinship, because for nearly all of human history, the people you grew up beside actually were your close relatives anyway. But proximity alone doesn't explain everything, especially not the deliberate outward-reaching pattern found at Sunghir, where partners were actively sought from distant, unrelated groups rather than simply avoided within the immediate one. This is where cultural practice appears to have layered directly on top of biological instinct. Anthropologists studying small-scale societies have documented widespread, nearly universal customs requiring marriage outside one's own immediate group, a practice researchers call exogamy. These customs typically arrive wrapped in cultural or spiritual justification, taboos, ancestral rules, sometimes explicit religious prohibition. But the practical effect remains strikingly consistent across unrelated cultures worldwide, forcing genetic material to circulate between groups rather than concentrating dangerously within one. Some researchers argue these customs likely emerged, at least in part, through simple trial and observation. Communities that intermarried too closely likely experienced visibly higher rates of stillbirth, infant mortality, and physical abnormality, consequences severe enough and consistent enough that surrounding groups eventually encoded avoidance into taboo, ritual, and rule, long before anyone understood the biological reason underneath. There's a third layer here too, one operating entirely below conscious awareness. Research into human mate preference has identified a genetic system called the major histocompatibility complex, a set of genes responsible for immune function that appears to influence attraction through scent. Multiple studies have found that people tend to prefer the natural body odor of partners with different MHC profiles from their own, profiles that closely related individuals are far more likely to share. This doesn't operate through conscious thought at all. It operates through smell, an ancient sensory channel steering attraction away from genetic similarity without either person ever realizing why a particular person simply smelled wrong or right. Layer all of this together, and the picture that emerges is remarkable. Early humans avoided reproducing with close family not through one clean mechanism, but through an overlapping stack of them. Psychological aversion built from childhood closeness, cultural rules reinforced by observed consequences, and even subconscious biological signaling through scent, each one covering gaps the others couldn't fully close alone. None of this required understanding genetics. None of it required science as we'd recognize it today. It required only pattern, consequence, and enough generations for behavior that worked to outcompete behavior that didn't, until protection against one of biology's oldest dangers became something closer to instinct itself, inherited not as a single gene, but as a layered, quietly brilliant survival system, which leaves something worth sitting with. Long before anyone could explain why, humans were already protecting the genetic future of their own children, guided by nothing more than who they grew up beside, who smelled right, and stories passed down about which union seemed, somehow, to end badly. Not science, just thousands of generations, quietly getting something essential right, long before they ever understood exactly what they were solving.